Here we are going to start the third part of the neck. And this will include the infrahyoid region. There's a diagram showing the muscles below the hyoid bone, which we call them the infrahyoid muscles or the strap muscles. That is the body of the hyoid. And this is the manubrium sterni, the clavicle. And those strap muscles are four muscles. Two superficial muscles, which are the omohyoid, the superior belly, and the inferior belly, and the sternothyroid. These are the two superficial muscles. The two deep muscles are the sternothyroid and the thyroid. The omohyoid have two bellies, superior belly, which arise from the side of the body of the hyoid bone, and inferior belly, which arise from the suprascapular ligament and notch, to unite in a common tendon. That common tendon will be attached to the clavicle by a fibrous loop. That is the way of insertion. Having a common tendon, that's insertion of both of them, and then the loop connected to the clavicle. The sternohyoid, from the back of the manubrium sterni and the middle end of the clavicle, that is the origin, to the body of the hyoid bone. The sternothyroid, almost the same origin as the sternohyoid, back of the manubrium and the middle end of the clavicle, to the oblique line of thyroid cartilage. Thyroid will start from the oblique line as origin to the body of the hyoid bone. These are the four muscles. That's a cadaveric figure for the same muscles, the omohyoid, the sternohyoid, the sternothyroid, and the thyroid. As you can see, they are the anterior relation of the thyroid gland. This is the thyroid gland. Here is the clavicle and the manubrium sterni. The nerve supply of those muscles have been described before, where the first cervical branch from it will join the hypoglossal nerve in its sheath. Then from the first cervical, a direct branch go to the thyroid, while that first cervical will be the superior limb. The second and third cervical will form what we call it the inferior limb. Both of them will unite to form the ansa cervicalis. This can be called the stena hypoglossi, although it is a false name. It has nothing to do with the hypoglossal nerve. And this one also called the descending cervicalis. From the ansa cervicalis, the other three muscles, the sternothyroid, sternohyoid, and the two bellies of omohyoid will be supplied. Those muscles mainly will depress the hyoid bone during swallowing. The main structure in the infrahyoid region, which we are going to describe, is the thyroid gland. Start by the development of such a gland, which develops from the floor of the primitive pharynx. That is the first, second, third, fourth branchial arches in the primitive pharynx. From the first arch, as you can see, there is one swelling which we call it tuberculum impar, and two lateral lingual swelling. The names here are median tongue and distal tongue, usually are not the one used. This one is the tuberculum bar, and these are the two lateral lingual swellings. Distally, there is what we call it the hypobranchial eminence, which is formed from the second and third arches. It will be divided into two parts, a cranial part and a caudal part. The anterior two-thirds of the tongue will develop from these three swellings, while the posterior third will be formed from the cranial part of the hypobranchial eminence. The distal part will form the epiglottis. The junction between the anterior two-thirds and the posterior third, that's where the thyroid will take origin, will start developing by an evagination or a diverticulum, which we call it the thyroid diverticulum. That diverticulum will form a duct which descends downwards at the thyroglossal duct in front of the hyoid bone to be on the sides of the thyroid cartilage and the trachea. That is the line of descent of the thyroglossal duct and the thyroid gland. It reaches down to be surrounding the thyroid cartilage and the trachea. That duct will give two pouches on each side, which will form the two lateral loops, and in the middle they are unite to form what we call it the isthmus of the gland. Thyroglossal duct will degenerate. Its lower part forms sometimes the pyramidal loop, and along that tract to the hyoid bone another structure may be present, which we call it the levator glandii thyroidi, which attach the pyramidal loop to the hyoid bone. That is the thyroglossal duct, fate of the duct. Lower part will form the gland, then the pyramidal loop, the thyroglossal band, which is surrounded by the levator glandii thyroidi, the rest will disappear. That's why the thyroid gland is connected to the hyoid bone by these two structures, the loop, the pyramidal loop, and the levator glandii thyroidi. So the gland is formed from the floor of the pharynx through the thyroglossal duct, the dotted line here. But there is a contribution from the fourth pharyngeal arch, which is responsible for the production of the parafollicular cells, which produce the calcitonin. So now the gland comes from two sources, mainly through the thyroglossal duct from the floor of the pharynx between the anterior two-thirds and posterior one-third of the tongue, and from partially the fourth pharyngeal arch. The parathyroid glands will arise from the third and the fourth pharyngeal pouches. That one from the third pouch will migrate downwards to form the inferior parathyroid, while that from the fourth pouch will form the superior parathyroid. That is the origin developmentally of the parathyroid glands. On the left side, there is two images showing two different anomalies of the thyroid gland. The upper one shows the thyroid gland still at the tongue, does not descend to the neck, forming what we call it the lingual thyroid. While the lower one, in front of the hyoid bone, there is a cyst, which we call it the thyroglossal cyst. There's two anomalies which we are going to describe for the next slide. Which occur as a result of the thyroglossal duct. This is what we call them the thyroglossal cysts. At the most upper end of the thyroglossal duct, between the anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3, this will be the site of the foramen cecum. And then this is the descent of the duct as we have seen before. It could be a lingual thyroid or a cyst, then suprahyoid or infrahyoid, or a very lower one, closed thyroid cartilage. These are the sites of the thyroglossal cyst. Here it shows again the site. This is usually the thyroid, lingual thyroid, and these are the three sides of the cyst. That's the lingual one, a cervical one, which either be superior or inferior to the hyoid, or a bit lower down. These are the sides of the thyroglossal cyst and the possible sides of the thyroid gland, which does not completely descend down. There's another variations of the thyroid gland during development. The position of the pyramidal lobe here, which could continue as a gland up to the hyoid bone, as a lobe of the gland, could come from the left side or the right side. There is no isthmus, and the pyramidal lobe and the part of the gland goes up to the hyoid, and here there is no isthmus, and the two lobes are normal, being an endocrine gland. But there is another type of thyroid variations, which we call it ectopic thyroid. It can deviate either to the left side of the neck, the right side here, or the left side of the neck. So it could be away from the middle line in any part on the right side or the left side. And this is what we call it the ectopic thyroid. And it needs to be recognized during surgery. Now the position of the gland. The position here is formed of two lateral lobes and an isthmus. This is the position of the possible pyramidal lobe, if present, and the levator glandular thyroidae, or the levator of thyroid gland in the middle line up to the hyoid bone. The lateral lobe extends from the oblique line of thyroid cartilage down to the level of the 6th or 5th tracheal ring, while the isthmus lies in front of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th tracheal rings in the middle line. That is the isthmus of the gland. The important part about the thyroid is the facial capsule of the gland. It has a true capsule like any other organ, but the facial capsule is formed from what we call it the pretracheal fascia, one of the visceral fascia of the neck, which ascend from the neck around the trachea, till it reaches the level of the thyroid gland. It will split into two layers, enveloping the gland, to unite at the upper ball of each loop and got attached to the oblique line of the thyroid cartilage. Extension from that fascia can be reached up to the body of the hyoid bone, but the main attachment is to the oblique line of thyroid cartilage. That's why the gland will move up and down during swallowing, with the larynx being attached to the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. And by this you can recognize the swelling in the neck, if it is thyroid or not, by asking the patient to swallow. It will move up and down. But if you ask the patient to protrude the tongue, if there is another swelling in the neck, this swelling, if it moves up and down again during protrusion of the tongue, this should be a thyroglossal cyst. That is the position of the gland. Here, two cadaveric pictures for the thyroid on the right side and on the left side. Here you can see the isthmus and the two lateral loops, front of the trachea, and on the sides of the thyroid cartilage. You can see the thyroid gland overlapping the trachea together with the common carotid artery, that is the internal jugular vein, that is the vagus nerve within the carotid sheath, which would be part of its posterior relation or posterolateral relations. Here you can see the left innominate vein, that is the right innominate, which will unite to form the superior vena cava. And you can see some veins coming from the thyroid cartilage, from the thyroid gland here. It could be one of the inferior thyroid veins, this one here. This one looks like an artery, which could be the thyroid ema. Deep, this is the innominate artery, the brachiocephalic, giving the right common carotid, the right subclavian, where the vagus is curving around it. On the left side, a bit enlarged gland is there, showing again the overlap over the carotid sheath. That is the subclavian artery. That is the scalenus anterior muscle with a branch which is the transverse cervical, suprascapular, and this part here is the inferior thyroid artery, the one ascending deep to the common carotid. This is the thyrocervical trunk branch of the first part of the subclavian artery. You can see also here the superior thyroid artery on each side, which will anastomosis above the level of the isthmus of the thyroid gland, is also over here, can be seen faintly, but it is much larger over this side. Here, this is the inferior thyroid vein, which is going to terminate in the left innominate vein. Usually there are two veins uniting to form one vein to end up in the left innominate vein. That is the internal jugular over here, cut edge, and this is the vagus nerve again. The very thin one is the phrenic nerve in front of the scalenus anterior over here. The gland have the isthmus, as we said, and the lateral loops. Lateral loop have a medial surface, a lateral surface or most superficial one, and a posterolateral one or posterior surface. These are the three surfaces of the gland. The relations are clear here. Laterally, the skin, the superficial fascia containing the platysma muscle, then the deep fascia, then the sternocleidomastoid with three muscles of the strap muscles, the sternohyoid, the sternothyroid, the omohyoid, because the thyrohyoid would be above the level of the gland. Posteriorly or posterolaterally will be the longus colli, the carotid sheath containing the common carotid and the interjugular, the vagus. This structure is supposed to be the sympathetic chain, but it should be embedded in the posterior wall of the carotid sheath. Medially is related above to the larynx anteriorly and the pharynx posteriorly, and below to the trachea anteriorly and the esophagus posteriorly. Superiorly separate from the thyroid cartilage by the cricothyroid muscle and separated from the pharynx by the inferior constrictor. Inferiorly, it will be separated from the trachea and the esophagus by the recurrent laryngeal nerve lying between both of them. And on the left side will be the recurrent laryngeal nerve on the left side again, with the thoracic duct at the lower level of the lateral loop. That is the relations of the thyroid gland, the lateral loops. The isthmus will be having anteriorly the skin, superficial fascia, then the deep fascia, the platysma will be on each side. Then above the isthmus will be the anastomosis between the two superior thyroid arteries, and below the isthmus will be the two inferior thyroid veins. That is the relation of the gland. That's almost at the level of the third tracheal ring. That is the isthmus, the two lateral loops. The inferior thyroid vein can be seen in front here. The carotid sheath with the two vessels, the interjugular and the common carotid. The vagus nerve is here. Sympathetic chain, almost. That is the esophagus, that is the trachea. The two recurrent laryngeal nerves can be seen. Thoracic duct can be seen also here. So that's a good image here. That is the strap muscles on the lateral surface. That is the sternocleidomastoid here. And that is the skin, superficial and deep fascia anterior to the isthmus of the thyroid gland. That is a good image showing the relations of the gland here. The blood supply of the gland, the arterial, there is three arteries: the superior thyroid from the external carotid, the inferior thyroid from the thyrocervical trunk, the first part of the subclavian artery, and the thyroidaema, which is usually come either from the arch of the aorta or the innominate artery, but it is not a constant one. The venous drainage are three veins: the superior thyroid vein, the middle, and both of them join the internal jugular vein, And the inferior thyroid, they are usually two. Sometimes they unite to form one single vein which end in the left innominate vein. These are the three veins which drain the thyroid gland. The superior thyroid will descend downwards, joined usually with the external laryngeal nerve to reach the medial side of the lateral lobe of the gland, and then end by anosmosing with the other side above the isthmus of the thyroid gland. The inferior thyroid, which arise from the thyrocephalic trunk, the first part subclavian, pass medially behind the carotid sheath in very close relation with the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and this will be discussed later, to end by supplying the gland. The thyroidema will pass anterior to the trachea to reach the lower part of the isthmus, supplying both lobes. Again, there is another anastomosis above the isthmus by the two superior thyroid veins, and this is the inferior thyroid which passes in front of the isthmus, draining both sides, ending in the left innominate vein. That's the view from the back of the pharynx and the esophagus and back of the thyroid gland, to show very important relations of the superior and inferior thyroid arteries with the laryngeal nerves. That is the superior thyroid artery, joining the external laryngeal nerve until both of them reach the tip of the lateral lobe of thyroid gland, very close to each other. That's why ligation of the superior thyroid artery should be very close to the lobe, or even with part of the lateral lobe, the tip, to avoid injury of the external laryngeal, which is the nerve supply of the cricothyroid muscle, one of the important muscles of the larynx. From below here, the inferior thyroid, as it goes behind the sheath, is very close to the recurrent laryngeal nerve as they approach the gland. So the recommendation is to ligate the artery away from the gland, not close to the gland, to avoid injury of the very important recurrent laryngeal nerve. That is the important relations here. That is the vagus on the left side, where the recurrent will be coming from the arch, around the arch of the aorta, while on the right side here, the recurrent laryngeal will curve around the right subclavian artery. That is the relation of the inferior thyroid with its branches to the recurrent laryngeal nerve. On the right side, that is the percentage here, where it can pass between two branches in 47.5, while on the left, as it passes between the two, is only 33%. Behind both of them, and that's in front of both of them, in 26.3, here is 11. Behind both of them, in 18%, while on the left side will be in 50%. That is the relations of the recurrent laryngeal nerve to the inferior thyroid artery, which is important to remember during operations on the thyroid gland. of the relation of the recurrent laryngeal nerve in relation to the inferior thyroid artery in the previous slide, due to the different origin of the right and left recurrent laryngeal nerve in relation to the subclavian on the right side, higher in the neck, and in the thorax on the left side. Here, another very important variations in relation of the recurrent laryngeal nerve to the thyroid gland itself. Thyroid gland is covered by the capsule, as we said, the pretracheal fascia. So the common site is to find it between the trachea and the esophagus, medial to the thyroid gland, the lateral loop. In other occasion, 3 other variations are there. The worst of them is the intrathyroid position of the recurrent laryngeal nerve in 4%, and this is an important variation to take care during removal of the thyroid gland, avoiding injury of the recurrent laryngeal. The second dangerous position is the one which is the paratracheal and usually embedded within the fascia of the thyroid gland, the pretracheal fascia. Again, injury is more common in this side. The last, which is the paraesophageal position in 6%, might be also within the capsule, but it's more likely to be in the position of the paratracheal within the capsule. These are the variation of the relations of the recurrent laryngeal nerve in relation to the thyroid gland, the lateral loop. So these 2 variations, the relation with the inferior thyroid artery and in relation with the gland and its capsule, are things to be remembered during operations on the thyroid gland.